Hello, and welcome to our webinar. Today, the topic is how to manage up when freight constraints rise. I could also say it differently. How do I explain my boss the situation in the current freight market? Before we go into the webinar, I'd like to explain a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, I'm talking about what do you see in front of you. In the middle of the screen, you see a slide area. That's where the main content will be presented. You can make that smaller, bigger, to allow for the other widgets to be visible. I think it makes sense to make it a little bigger while we're in the webinar. On a copy of today's slide deck will be available on the bottom left in the widget. Some other things to draw your attention to. On the top right, you see the upcoming webinars. One is next week, the State of Trade, with our Chief Economist, Phil Levy, and it's about trade and the current environment. And then there's one on April 21st, which is about customs RFP with our own celebrity, Tom Gold. And before I met Tom Gold, I didn't know celebrities in customs existed, but they do. Then there is a Q&A widget on the top right. Please ask as many questions as possible. Some of them we will be answering directly to you. Others we will take public and we'll talk about it here in the Q&A section. And then on the bottom right, we always love to hear your feedback and suggestions for topics for other webinars. An on-demand version of this will be available after this webinar on the same link, and I'll repeat that message at the end. Good. Before we're going into it, a legal notice. We just want to remind you that everything that we present here in this webinar is based on the situation at this time and maybe not customized to your specific situation. All right, now the more exciting part. First of all, the one you're hearing here, it's me, Sanne Manders. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Flexport. I've been here since the very early days when we didn't have any clients, let's put it that early. So very excited to be here. With me, I have two excellent speakers. One is our own Beth Torrenson. And Beth has been with Flexport for quite a bit of time and leads our sales for global key accounts, our largest clients that Flexport is serving. Beth has been in the industry for 25 years and is truly passionate about solving complex problems. She's also a licensed broker and a Six Sigma Master Black Belt. That's a lot of words, but she applies all those skills to our largest clients, and very happy to have you here, Beth. Thank you for joining. And then on the right, we have Eric Dickens. Eric is the Director of Category Management at Trademark Global. And for those who don't know Trademark Global, Trademark is actually a very big company, and they call themselves a data-driven supplier of consumer products. And that means they build brands and bring those to market through all major online and brick-and-mortar retails. They own over 20 brands. And Eric, I hope I explained this correctly, because it's a bit of a different business than most people are used to. Eric graduated from the University of Dayton in accounting, and has worked at many Fortune 500 companies in roles in finance, business analytics, category management, supply chain, and sourcing. That's also the way he approaches his current role from the finance and accounting lens, really seeing how he can make the supply chain at Trademark better and bring let's say the tools of the modern world to Trademark. Thank you, Eric. It's always a pleasure to have a client joining this webinar. That makes it so much more impactful.
Thank you for having me.
Great. What we want to do before we start off is start with a little poll. And why do we do this little poll? Is because we want to know what have been your biggest challenges over the past 6 months. It's a multiple choice, so please click as much as you want. But we have the choices between securing capacity, inventory management, supply chain delays, internal stakeholder management, something that we will discuss extensively today, and of course, the obvious one, shipping cost. Please take 30 seconds to pick your choice, and then we're kicking it off with the webinar. All right, a few more seconds. And there we go. All right. Securing capacity, not, we expected that one to be high there. Inventory management, only 20%. That's actually great to hear. That means that a lot of you had inventory and were able to sell. Supply chain delays, yes, on-time performance has basically gone to zero in the industry, and we'll show some data on that. Internal stakeholder management, I'm very happy to hear that a lot of you don't have the issue there, although we will be talking a lot about it today to make sure that you can have the right conversations with internal stakeholders, and of course, stating the obvious, the shipping cost. Great, I'm going to hand it over. And Beth, you want to take us through? Beth? In that case, we don't hear Beth. I'll take you through the agenda. We're first going to talk about the market constraints and proof points. Then we're going to talk about historical performance metrics.
Great.
How to turn the chaos into an opportunity, and then some key takeaways before we have time for Q&A. I hear you, Beth, so you're back. Please kick it off. Oh, Beth is frozen. The tools of the modern world. Unfortunately, I'm able to talk about this as well. So I'll take it. I'll take you through the first couple of slides, and then we'll wait for Beth to come back. Good. So let's talk about the market in a second. A lot has happened in the last year. Of course, we were all super stressed out in the fall of 2019 about IMO. Well, IMO turned out to be almost a non-event compared to everything else that happened in 2020. Just a year ago, it's a year and let's say 4 or 5 weeks ago, the factories in China closed. In March, we were all starting to work from home, and we were predicting doom and gloom for the world. I think at that moment in time, when you would have polled 100 economists, 100 would have said that we would go into a deep recession. Well, the obvious was the opposite was true for our industry. It went really, really well, and then we got into the capacity crunch, and initially the blank sailings and the lockdowns. Capacity taken out of the market, and then all of a sudden everyone realized we're at home. We need a lot of stuff. So the peak season started in June with a tsunami of freight. As a result, record-breaking rates, equipment shortages, on-time performance at historical lows, and that's where we are right now. I know that Beth is back, so Beth, kick it off.
Yes, thank you, Sana. Thanks for the save there. Technical issue. But yes, as Sana said, we've had unprecedented times. That word has been overused probably in 2020 and 2021, but it truly fits the circumstance in the most profound way. When we look at even just how different parts of the businesses were impacted, we look at the first area that was hit, and air capacity was significantly down when you look at all of the belly capacity that was moved out of the network. Obviously, freighter deployment has created the lack of freighter deployment has created an environment in which capacity has shrunk significantly on the air side. So we've seen a lot of trends there. We're looking at, obviously, a vicious ocean market cycle. It continues to create problems. The poll was very telling when you look at capacity and equipment shortages and supply and demand imbalance. And we'll show a slide that illustrates that a bit moving forward here, too. But everything from labor shortages to vessel delays has created just an incredible amount of chaos, which in turn has spiked rates. Reliability has then gone down, and you really don't know even when you should be going out to bid for your business or how to engage in 2021. So a lot of these factors are playing into the instability that everyone has seen this year. We talked about equipment shortages. Nothing is more reflective of that, the cause of that shortage, than this chart here. When you look at imports being up 20% from 2020 and 15% over 2019 levels, you can see the disparity amongst the import and export volume and why those equipment issues are taking place here. The common theme is all of you are supply chain heroes, and you've been working harder than ever, but there are a lot of uncontrollables in the market. As we look at how this actual COVID economy was created, there's a lot of different reasons, and I'm going to bring Eric into this conversation at some point too, as we start to talk about how it's impacted his business and create this community in which you can all feel the sense of empathy for what's happening in the world today. We've talked a little bit about low inventories. Glad to see that on the poll that is the most pressing issue on everyone's list. But as we go into 2021 and things still remain unstable, my expectation is that inventory turns will continue to be more difficult to manage, and we will see more focus on that area as well. Obviously, this massive infusion of e-commerce, people went from more of service expectations with any type of additional funds to now buying goods. They've been at home. We've known what this boom has looked like, and it's created some additional stress to the economy known as COVID these days. At this point, underneath, again, disposable income is being used in much different ways. And so we're seeing really this imbalance of trade taking place, the changing peak season patterns. Eric, this is something that we talked about earlier today, too. And not only do we have what occurred in 2020 when we look at really there being these peak season points that we have never seen historically. But something that you brought up that I thought was really interesting was the infusion of some of the Amazon changes as well, looking at things like Amazon Prime and how that's impacting it, and really that there's just more to come. Do you want to add some commentary on that as to how it impacted your business as well? I think we may have you on mute, Eric. It's okay. We can come back to you on that one. Great. There you go.
So as far as peak season patterns changing, I mean, 2020, we obviously had a global set of events that sort of cascaded into layers of problems. And I think that what happened in 2020 was we didn't fully see it as much of a change in the pattern of freight movement, but we're starting to realize that now. So as these compounding problems have sort of layered up, 2021 is shaping up to be a very different phasing, if you will. I think you've got, just in general, capacity problems, extended lead times that are significantly changing our freight movement patterns, but also things like Prime Day. That Amazon is planning for the early summer time period. Other retailers are jumping on that too. And that's creating somewhat of an early second peak, if you will, for freight movement.
Yes, absolutely. Great. Thank you for sharing that. One thing that was really interesting, and I'm sure is top of mind for everyone on this call too, is normally a singular event creates this chaos. You might have a port strike, you might have something, a weather challenge. There could be lots of reasons that disrupt it. the unprecedented amount of inputs for this disruption is what is really causing a lot of chaos and really the primary reason for this call. How do you manage all of these competing events that are impacting your supply chain and paint the full story for your executive team? So we're going to focus a lot on that today, but the message behind this is a lot of things are happening. And so, what we want to really dig into is we can see all of these different inputs, the Los Angeles anchorages, the rates are soaring based on demand and shrinking pool of empty boxes. Reliability has essentially dropped to 35% across all carriers. What it's telling us is the costs are going up. There are a lot of areas that are creating this chaotic environment. And what we need to do is be able to create the narrative that helps you make informed decisions for your supply chain moving into 2021. One thing I did want to highlight here too is we're seeing a lot of market share gained by freight forwarders. And the reason for that and where we're going back to on this is just there truly is so much instability with the carrier contracts. And you all probably felt the pain last year where your rates at the beginning of the year were certainly not what you were paying at the end of the year. And again, due to market conditions, there's just a lot of things that are outside of control today. We're going to jump to our next poll, and then we'll dig into ways that we can help mitigate some of that pain. So you can see here, do you feel your supply chain was ready for the impacts of COVID-19? I know you've got 3 answers, yes, no, or too complicated to say. Let's give everybody a moment here to go ahead and put their results in. We see a very big delta here. Everyone is saying no. I would be surprised if that yes number was higher, because how could you be prepared for that? And that's what our focus of today will be. We can't predict all of the events, but how do you best secure that you're mitigating risk? How do you communicate efficiently to your business partners about what is happening? The first place to start is how were supply chain leaders historically measured? What were their elements of success? And we look at these 3 main bullets. On-time performance was key, looking at rate reductions and mitigation, and then carrier and forwarder performance. And essentially, based on the story we've just told, you can throw all 3 of those out the window. And so I want to have a conversation with Eric here. We've had some really interesting dialogue around what we consider the new metrics today. So Eric, maybe you can talk us through your opinion on kind of what these new measurable achievements could be, because these clearly are not going to be what we're going to be able to measure in the near future.
Yeah, Beth, I think that the kind of the global scale of the problems that we're all facing is kind of created a situation where you can't essentially solve for things right now, right? It's more of a reassess and mitigate sort of lens that we're trying to look at things through. And I think that, in terms of on-time performance, something that we're doing is we're trying to translate that now into sort of realizable sales, right? So if you look at our ability to deliver inventory in a timely fashion within lead times that we're normally accustomed to, that's kind of out the window. So at this point, we're trying to predict when freight will flow to us so that then we can say, well, what level of sales can that support, right? So some categories of products for us will be challenging, others won't. But in general, we're kind of changing the way that we're just having that conversation about on time. Rate reduction.
Eric, Eric, I'd like to ask you a question about the on-time performance too, because I think it's really important what you said about changing the dialogue and looking at, how do you actually continue to have available inventory? When we look at that, has your company weighed, and when you communicate to your executive team, one element that perhaps was not considered before was the risk of lost revenue through sales, right? And so before, there wasn't such a disparity in transit times and the ability to execute against performance standards. When you're phrasing that to your executive team, is that part of your conversations today?
Yeah, I think it has to be. Last year, we enjoyed, as an e-commerce a business that's serving the e-commerce channel, we obviously benefited from the COVID response in some ways, right? In terms of lift, increased demand. I think 2021 now, the challenge is how do you comp those numbers? How do you, recognize whether you've got a new normal in terms of the level of demand? And now how do you manage your inventory availability to support that new level of sales, right? So last year, we were able to successfully deliver all the inventory we needed for fourth quarter. This year could be something different, right? With lead times and capacity problems, not to mention simply, the delays in freight movement. It's all sort of compounding and starting to create conversations about when can goods deliver and is there risk to sales as a result. You prefer to have your season's goods in place early. Now we're trying to figure out, does that become something that's later than we're accustomed to, and how will that affect sales?
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's move on to the rate mitigation portion of it, because you had some interesting ideas around rate mitigation. And I know that we've talked a lot about balancing, instead of looking for reductions, it's how do you properly balance your FAK versus your fixed capacity as well, and how do you align it with the seasonality of your business here too. And so, we know that rates are what they are today. We hope that eventually we'll get back to some sense of normalcy, but until they do, can you talk to me a bit about how you're thinking in terms of strategy?
So I think in a stable freight environment like we've enjoyed for the last number of years, the rate conversation was a matter of what serves the business best in terms of fixed rates. How much of my business can I sign up for on fixed rate and meet those allocation responsibilities, right? And this year, given the fact that we saw contract rates sort of deprioritized in 2020 versus FAK and super premiums, the question this year is, well, now how do I utilize the balance in order to give myself as much flexibility as I can to move freight faster without also increasing my cost profile too much? I think the biggest question as an importer this year is how are the carriers going to view fixed rates this year? Will they prioritize them like they have in the past, or will it look more like 2020?
Great. Great. And then we've talked a bit about carrier and forwarder performance, and the shift has really gone from how do you execute versus how do you drive down costs in this market too. So we look at execution, we look at the ability to obtain equipment, manage those delays, support those volume shifts that you talked about as well. One thing that's really interesting is forecasting, as I'm sure most of you on the call are feeling, has become more and more difficult when you talk about extended lead times. How do you actually get to an achievable number there, and how do you create some predictability around your supply chain? So the ability when you look at carrier and forwarder measurement, now it's more about response. Now it's more about preparation. Now it's more about the partnership element versus some of the more tactical things that were taking place in years past. Would you agree with that?
100%. And I think too that the forwarders are going to play such a key role this year, now that we sort of understand the environment that we're living in, where last year every week was an adventure in understanding where we stood. I think for 2021, now we can partner properly with our forwarders and say, hey, are you going to be valuable in allowing me to achieve or even possibly exceed my weekly allocation on fixed rate? What flexibility exists there as my service partner? And also in getting equipment. So the relationships that forwarders have with the carriers are going to determine their ability to get equipment for us when we need it. So I think that sort of the measurements are different for 2021, certainly in terms of is my freight moving, right, becomes the key. And is it moving when I want it to because you were able to allocate equipment for me?
Hey,
Great.
Eric, I have another question here. And internally, we call this always like, being the wedding planner in Seattle, right? You have to prepare your client for the worst situation, that it rains on your wedding day. If you're looking at your whether it's forwarders or carriers, what are you expecting from them in this partnership to prepare you for a rainy day on your wedding?
I think that as if you're doing your planning properly with your forwarding partner, you're looking at how you're projecting your containers to phase month by month, week by week. And so as we get into peaks, how are you able to help us work through those peaks and maximize the amount of goods that I can move on fixed rates, right? We know that rates have sort of reset to a new normal, at least for this year. And so how do I keep that expense profile from increasing even further by maximizing my ability to move freight on fixed, and then being opportunistic with FAK on certain lanes at certain times of year. So those are the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, so to use the analogy of the wedding planner again, is you want them to make sure that there is a plan B if there's rain, but also at the day itself, try to make the best out of it if it rains, right? That's basically what you're saying. Yeah. All right,
exactly. Great. I think the key is for us, quite honestly, it's so imperative this year, more so than ever, to share your forecast, your container forecast, with your forwarding partners, so that they understand what's coming, and they can be proactive in terms of developing strategies for you to be successful in those key time periods.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eric. People like Eric and others on the phone, I'm sure, understand that the risks this year to decision making are much higher and much different than they were in the past. So we know when we look at how we were historically measured, and then we talked about some new ways that people are looking at success. We're defining success in this environment very differently than we did in years past. But things to consider during that process and to communicate to your team as well is that market conditions today are uncontrollable, and they're going to have a significant impact to those historical metrics. So we need to start looking for efficiencies, and we'll talk about ways to do that as we continue through our discussion today. But the most important thing is that uninformed decision-making could potentially create additional disruption. Some disruption is good. Some reimagining of your supply chain is good. We're going to have a lot of great learnings through this chaos, and we'll talk about that as well. But we want to make sure that we're providing the right tools so that you can make those decisions and not creating unnecessary disruption. The world is taking care of that for us enough on its own. So we want to make sure that what we're doing is meaningful and impactful for the business. There's also a drastic shift in these landed costs, the delays in the supply chain. Everything is being elevated up. Truly, people in supply chain roles today are absolute heroes going through this. They've never had the exposure to the C-suite like they do these days, because these decisions are so important, and transportation is no longer a siloed event. Everything that's happening within the world is impacting every part of an organization. And so now they're being asked to explain these things to the C-suite, to the executive team, in a much different way that they have been in the past. So a lot to consider there and a lot to prepare for, and really takes a unique perspective to prepare your teams. We are going to go to our next full question. So the question here is, what are your leadership team's biggest misconceptions about the market right now? We'll give you just a few minutes to dig into this one as well. Give everyone just another second on that. Love this. This is very, very telling. So we can see that 50% of the audience believes that the executive team thinks that these issues are just going to correct themselves quickly. And a lot of that comes from uninformed decisions. And Eric's nodding his head here because this is a real sweet spot for him, and something he's brought up numerous times too, is these aren't going any away quickly. There are a lot of things we still have to solve for in 2021 and potentially beyond. And so that means that there have to be some fundamental shifts in how business takes place. Eric, do you want to comment on that? I know this is near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because as we sort of rounded the bend in 2020 and sort of had a good enough holiday period, we managed to deliver enough inventory to be successful and those sorts of things. There's this kind of, and not just in my building, but with many other people in the business that I talk to, that, oh my gosh, thank God that's over, right? As if 2020 rolling over for calendar purposes was going to change the world that we live in, and that 2021 couldn't possibly be as bad, right? And I think that that was kind of this general sort of irrational optimism as we came into January, thinking that, well, 2021 might look bad through first quarter. It might have a lot of the same challenges, but some of this stuff has to resolve itself, right? Well, unfortunately, things have actually gotten a little bit worse. And then there's still landmines out there like Suez, right? That then, again, on a global scale, impacts everybody. So I think that the new news for 2021 became, not only is this stuff around longer than we thought, and we're going to have to figure out how to navigate it, but then raw material prices took another big jump in November, December, and in February in China. So there was already pressure there on FOB costs, and it got drastically worse and did not really resolve itself after Chinese New Year, which again was the general sentiment. So, you know, 2021 is already proving not to be, not to have many relief valves quite yet. And I think that that's what makes it difficult to communicate up, is that not only is it still there, but it's also gotten a bit worse. But we can't be afraid of those messages either.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a nice segue into, you know, we know these things are happening. Now the question is, so what? So how do we make the best of this circumstance? How do we turn this chaotic environment into opportunities for efficiencies? And so we're going to dig into that a bit on our next slide here. So the most important part is, let's tell a proactive narrative. A big thing that we've seen is sometimes information is just relayed too late. So help your team understand the larger supply chain demand impacts from COVID-19 disruptions. Rethink how teams measure success and benchmark improvements. One thing that was mentioned in a lot of our discussions with clients too is, you know, this narrative is really created around, what do we do about these issues? Let's take a look at what we're doing really well and continue to build on that. And let's also find areas of opportunity in which we can drive value. We can kind of identify today, and I see there's some questions in the chat around rates too. Those things are going to be market driven. We don't see any relief coming in the very near future by any means, but there are other areas of your business that you can look at, especially as things have changed. So we'll continue to talk about that as we go through. One thing that we recommend is to use third-party data points and market intel, creating this community of information that is both carrier, forwarder, agnostic, so you can actually get a sense of where the market is landing and how it is across the board. Things like the Drury Report, the Journal of Commerce is a great source of information. When you're looking at air freight, the TAC index is a great way to stabilize and really move along with trends here too. There's some creative things you can do there, but you'll also be able to pull market intel and identify trends and actions taking place there too. We also suggest that you get Sme Insights. So those subject matter experts are going to be able to give you a different perspective and represent the organization in a different way that you have seen in the past from perhaps your internal stakeholders. So make sure that you're getting a forwarder perspective or a carrier perspective in these conversations. Attend industry conferences. I know that many people attended TPM on this call. We know it was a little different this year, but those are great ways to get a lot of information about what's happening in the industry and what we can see forward. Eric, anything you'd like to add to this with regard to sources you found valuable as well?
I think that it all sort of weaves into the narrative that you're trying to communicate to the executive team, and it's, you know, it's sort of the, what does my playbook need to be now for 2021, right? I probably had a playbook back in the fourth quarter for 2021 that I've since needed to review and readjust several times for continuing changes in the market. But I think it's critical that you're looking at that playbook for the year and saying, identify what is the most important things for me to deliver success for the business, right? If given the current constraints and all the risks to moving freight on time, you sort of have to really dive deep and say, well, what are the couple of things that I have to deliver in order to deliver the year? And your playbook's got to be built around those things. And then you put the resources behind it, and you gather facts from your third parties and your subject matter experts. You've got to bring the whole village together and say, okay, these are the three things that we have to do so that we don't fail in 2021. So how are we going to go about that? And that's a very different mindset than a normal, stable market environment would allow you to do your planning.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the ways that people are doing this, and we look at this information here too, is something that's been brought up a few times is the increase in lead times. So we look at how do you look at your shipment life cycle data and identify these increasing patterns? How do you communicate the impact of those patterns to your organization? And one way is obviously historical data will be very helpful. One thing that I do want to note is that some of that you can just throw out the window. Thank you, Eric. You're right about that. Is 2020 was a year that was like no other, and we don't know if 2021 will look similar or beyond, but there are some learnings that you can get from there. So if we look at the seasonality of your business and then we map it against some of the disruption that we've seen this year, if you look at increased lead times and then you start looking at tying some stronger visibility solutions to things like that to help make sure that you're optimizing opportunities, there are some areas that we can support with data as an industry, not just as a Flexport, but as an industry. These types of things really help support making informed decision making. And then looking at your landed cost by seasonality, although they will look very different from years past because of the inflation on market rates, you can still see typically the trend of when you're feeling the most heat. Include some of those additional peaks that we anticipate, the Amazon Prime Week that you mentioned, things that people are just looking to diversify throughout the year. But these two elements can actually add a layer of information that you can use to arm your executive team with.
Yeah, I think that the lead time conversation and the landed cost conversation, those are, I think the lead time conversation is what is going to determine your landed cost outcomes, right? Mm-hmm. So what we have to be doing this year in a way that we've never, at a level of intensity maybe that we've never done before, is production planning meetings with vendors, daily, even weekly meetings with your forwarder to talk about, hey, this is the playbook we put out there. What's changing? What are you hearing? How can you help us solve the lead time problem when you take over and take physical control of the freight? And I think that for our business right now, the real key is the manufacturing lead time. And our ability to partner with our suppliers in a deep, legitimate way to confirm capacity, confirm cargo ready dates. They're living, quite frankly, in a very dynamic environment over there that's sometimes difficult for us to comprehend. And they've got a lot of new business coming their way too that they've never had before because of global demand. So it's really important you stay close to your supplier partners and make sure that you're still front and center with them in terms of prioritizing your freight. So to me, it's who are the key players that are going to help you be successful this year? And that's your freight partners, that's your suppliers. And then, you just have to translate that through your playbook and make sure that, on a weekly basis, monthly basis, you're still on track to deliver.
Great. Yeah, great insight. And I think that everyone is feeling that same type of pain. It's interesting. I do agree that absolutely everyone needs to reset their playbook. And the first step to that is to review where you're strong and where you need to support some additional weaknesses. And so I would be remiss to think that anyone on this call has not experienced some type of exposure to the weakness in their systems this year. It happens at all points of the supply chain. As a forwarder, as a carrier, we have all had to relook at our processes as well and figure out ways to best support our client base. I know that each importer or exporter, for that matter, is doing the same. One thing that we recommend is to identify some opportunities for improved technology and processes. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's coming from your freight forwarder, but as you start to look at how you support data today internally, you can start to shift that conversation. One thing that we've seen is that upstream visibility, particularly when you're seeing those additional lead times taking place, becomes even more critical. Because if you start to move even beyond those lead times, your inventory turns are so drastically impacted. Now you're at very high risk of loss of sales. So, the goal is, how do you identify those problems very early on? Have a contingency plan. Back to the Seattle wedding. If it's going to rain, what are you going to do? Do you have another location? Do you have a tent? How does this work? Putting some contingency plans in place, but having process and technology support those. So if you can get that end-to-end visibility, whether it's an investment in something that gives you the upstream visibility, or if it's perhaps the downstream visibility when you look at your final mile delivery, that's creating a lot of pain because of inconsistency in deliveries. I think we can all agree that we're sort of booking the container as an importer and hoping it shows up and not necessarily knowing when that will be. And so the more improved visibility you can have there, the more planning and revisions to that playbook that you can make. We also look at improving your efficiencies, look at the root cause of potential lost business and what that cost would be to move via premium versus some of the standard services. There's a lot of flexibility right now in those services today. Really, your number one goal should be to keep your freight moving so that you do keep those clients in-house. And then invest in, again, some type of order management service that can identify those delays early. Anything you'd like to add to those, or can you actually anecdotally share a bit about how you're leveraging technology for your team as well, Eric?
So I think that the technology comes into play, certainly for us in the lead time conversation. If you're not utilizing a good tech platform to visualize how your lead times are changing dynamically, because they are, and you don't want your data to limit your understanding of what's going on with your own business, right? So I think those tech platforms become critical in helping you see things in real time. And lead times took a giant leap back in the fall as we sort of rounded into Q4. Everybody was focused on delivering Q4, and then you started to look at lead times for goods that you were going to have to deliver in Q1, and suddenly lead times were doubling, right? So your ability to see that in real time is critical so that you can react, you can talk to your suppliers. And I think it really comes down to regular planning with your partners. And, if you're using a tech platform as a supplement or as a leading indicator, that's great, but that's still not going to help you actually solve the problem. And so you just have to have good partners and good communication with them. And I think that that's how you confidently take a plan to your executive team and say, we're doing everything possible. But technology certainly plays a role.
Great. Thank you. As we think about, too, obviously it's a massive undertaking and solving so many of these complex issues that are taking place in the market today. And one piece of advice we like to share with our clients and non-clients alike is, we need to start, and we need to predict and isolate some events so you can make progress incrementally on some of these issues. And so one thing is, how do you tackle these massive problems? Would love to hear your insight as to how you have, as an organization, started to break down some of these critical issues and get them in front of your team.
Yeah, I think the key has been reduce it to something smaller and more manageable, right? The old adage about how do you eat an elephant a bite at a time certainly applies here. I didn't want Sana to have the only really cool anecdote, so I had to throw that in. But honestly, it's in order to manage something that's this global and this layered, you have to start identifying first you have to know where you're headed, so your playbook's got to be revised for what the conditions are. And then you've got to isolate each individual thing around your strengths so that you can act fast and with confidence. And, it may be that you're finding ways to be more efficient to improve your lead times, and you're actually maybe correcting problems you haven't corrected yet. So, for example, are you creating really efficient POs, right? So are you giving your vendors a PO that's easy for them to manage, easy to manufacture, and easy to ship? So, for example, in your world, does one PO equal one container? That's the cleanest way you can possibly hand demand over to your supplier. And then it benefits all the way through the supply chain when it's that clean. Those are areas of the business that you have to look at and ask yourself, can I make a small improvement here and maybe gain some lead time back as a result? I think that, regularly revising your priority plan for your containers with your origin team, with your suppliers, with your forwarder, those daily conversations that you have in what's moving today, what's moving tomorrow. It's incumbent on us as the importer to communicate what's the most important thing today. Make this first, book this first, move this first, right? So it's not just communication up the chain, but certainly to your partners who are helping you execute.
Great. And I think this last statement on this slide is really important too, about really create a path to mitigation. I mean, we want to minimize the impact that all of this is going to have on your supply chain. Make sure that those goals are achievable. Make sure you have those next steps, because if you're going to be communicating these goals to your executive team and aligning a lot of business partners, you want to set them up for success. And those goals may look different than what they did in years past, and that's okay. Incremental progress is really going to make a big difference this year. Getting your house in order in all areas that are controllable versus non-controllable is going to help really impact the outcome when we look back at how this year looks. And so we encourage you to predict those issues, tackle them with a team, make sure that there's enough visibility within your organization so people understand the great work that you're doing. Again, the goal is, these supply chain people have been real heroes through this, but they are also the ones taking the majority of the heat during a very difficult time because of lack of knowledge throughout an organization. And so we want to arm you with the tools today to make sure that you're having those conversations in a meaningful way. I think the big thing too is don't do this just once. You need to recap regularly. This is a cadence that you need to be having with your executive teams. You need to keep them informed of these changes. We've seen how quickly things are changing in our environment today. What the information that you fed them 3 or 4 weeks ago could have rapidly changed based on what we're seeing in the marketplace today. Make sure that you're recapping regularly to all of those stakeholders. And we've got a few key takeaways too that we want to leave you with, and then we'll open it up to the Q&A section. We want to start with things that you really should not do on day one. And the first thing is speculate. Everything is much better when it's data driven. There's no hiding behind what the economic situation in the world is today and what the capacity issues are. The more transparent you can be, the more transparent your partners are being with you, the better set up for success everyone is. And on that note, don't be afraid to ask your business partners for help. We want to, whether it's Flexport or our competitors, everyone wants to support you through this process. So don't be afraid to ask for help. We're seeing a lot. We have the unique position of seeing a lot of companies make changes, and we can share some of those best practices with you as well. We're here to support you along the way. Some things that you can absolutely action are understand those leadership challenges you face. They may be in the executive suite. We still have to have some empathy for what they're trying to solve for. So, you're teaching people how to really succeed in a crisis, and how you come prepared with information and suggestions is going to differentiate you, and it's going to change. We started this conversation around how you are historically measured. Those who show up with solutions and with mitigation plans and with a deep understanding of everything that falls into your order to cash cycle and how your impact to the business actually occurs from the logistics side are going to really stand out in front of their teams, because they're going to feel better armed. They're going to be able to speak directly. One thing we suggest is have executives speak to executives. They're typically measuring the same type of things on both ends of the relationship. It helps with a credibility factor for you. It also brings some consistent messaging. You absolutely should make those connections. And then, as Eric has said, make that plan. Create efficiency gains, isolate that functionality that you can really improve on, and understand the overall business impact. There has never been a better time to remove the siloed activity within an organization and bring people together, because there is a common goal, and that is to keep cargo moving, keep inventory replenished, keep sales active. Everyone is working towards a common vision. Don't be afraid to get creative. I know people have had to do really unusual things. The only thing you could predict about 2020 and 2021 is that you could predict nothing. So get creative. Don't be afraid to try new things. You rely on your business partners for some of those solutions as well. And I can't say this enough, is being as transparent as possible is going to really help you communicate based on verified data, and that is really going to support your cause here as well too. And Eric, I know you probably have some final thoughts here, because I know you've done a lot of work with this amongst your team. Do you want to share some thoughts before we kind of turn it over to the audience here?
Sure. I think that in my mind, what I jotted down was, you're not in this alone, and you can't be successful without the rest of the business and without your partners. So make sure bad news travels fast too, and keep that executive team involved in what's going on, because they're going to be key as well to your success. You can't be afraid to deliver bad news or to talk about what's changing. And then I think reviewing and revising your playbook frequently, right? So you have to be proactive in reacting to things. I think last year we sat back and waited to see what was going to happen a lot of the year. And I think 2021, you've got to be decisive and you've got to take action when you have enough good information to do it.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we just have a few more questions rolling in here. So, great. Thanks, Anna.
Yes. Shall we? Let me moderate that. And there are a lot of questions around capacity in the industry, be it on the ocean and on the air side. And I oversee procurement at Flexport and have the carrier relations. So I'm gonna address those questions myself. And the main question is basically, can't the carriers just expand capacity, right, and bring down the rates? Let me first address the air freight market. If you're looking at the air freight market, the capacity is there; it's just grounded. Right, so we're relying basically for international travel, for international freight right now on full freighters, because the wide bodies that typically bring passengers around the world are just grounded, and that's typically 40–50% of total capacity globally. It depends per trade lane, but globally that's roughly what it is. So that's basically the situation that we're in. 40–50% of the capacity is grounded. Some of it is flying as what they call freighters, so passenger freighters, but that only works when the rates are really high, and that means $7, $8, $9 a kilogram. Otherwise, those freighters are not economical and will be grounded again. What you should foresee here is that with international travel, starting to recover, the passenger planes will get back to the skies, and capacity crunch will alleviate. We do expect this will take a long time, right? Although some countries are running are moving pretty fast on vaccinations. Many countries are not. And as a result, international borders and international traffic or travel will remain reduced for a longer period of time. So you should anticipate 2023 for, let's say, back to normal there. And before, you will just face elevated rate situations and a lot of volatility specifically there. If you're looking at the ocean, maybe one more thing on the air side. No, they can also not build more freighter planes, right? All the production slots for freighter planes have been planned for the next 5 or 10 years. So we know exactly what comes to the market. I think it's 7 or 3 747s in the coming 2 years or something like that. That's so it's very much we know how much that is, and it's not much. Right, there are some conversions, but also the conversion capacity is maxed out for the 777s. If you're looking at the ocean liners, building a ship takes a long time. Although there have been quite a few new orders, don't expect those ships to enter sailing this year. So we'll have to do it with the current capacity. On top of that. I do think that with the concentration in the on the steamship line side, the capacity management will also something that will be here to stay. So if there is a significant decline in trade, it's much easier for, let's say, 8 companies to control the capacity than what it used to be, let's say, 20 or 30 companies 5 to 10 years ago. So what you saw earlier in 2020, when the demand dried up, that a lot of ships were laid up, that's going to happen again, and that will then and freight prices will, as a result, not drop to rock bottom prices. There is one thing that is an interesting dynamic in here, which is hard to predict, is that a lot of carriers have chartered a lot of new capacity to fulfill their demand in the last 6 months, and that is at very high charter rates, and typically also locked in for a quite significant amount of time. And those expensive charters cannot be laid up. They're extremely expensive to lay up, so they might actually remain in sailing. And that's an additional dynamic that is very hard to predict what they're going to do for rates. But I would just assume, right, there's not going to be extra capacity, and demand is high. So assume that 2021 will be a peak season for the whole year, effectively. There's one more question here around container equipment availability. That is a problem that is resolving currently. A lot of containers have been manufactured, and equipment is being relocated to the right places. So that is resolving. The only thing is with the Suez has thrown a bit of a wrench in that. So there will be, in the coming 2 months, there will be definitely impact of container shortages, just because sailings will take longer to get back to Asia. So that was a lot of questions that I combined here about freight surcharges and prices of freight. I want to go to the next question, and that's a question for Eric. Do you see value in forwarders under-promising and over-performing? Versus do you see value in just seeing what it is, right? Seeing the reality. I think this is a very good question, especially when you have to manage that dynamic internally in your company. Eric.
It's an excellent question, actually, and I think that for me personally, the answer is give me the truth as fast as the truth becomes apparent, and I don't want anything sugar-coated, right? We're not in an environment where that's helpful anymore. I think that in a stable environment, in years past, you might be able to hedge a little bit, but in today's market, there's too much scarcity of almost everything. And I think you need to know the facts, you need to know them quickly so that you can take action quickly. And I would want my partners to think similarly.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric. We have one more question, and I think both of you, Eric, if you start with it, and Beth jumps in. How do you approach diversifying your carrier portfolio?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that for me?
How do you approach? Yeah, how do you approach diversifying your carrier portfolio?
I think as an importer, we look to our forwarders to offer that diversification, right? So the strength of our forwarding partners should reflect a broad portfolio of relationships with the carriers and allow us access to equipment. And, if we're exceeding allocations certain times a year, give us access to that flexibility too.
Yeah, I would agree. I think having a business partner with a diversified portfolio has never been more important. We saw, particularly on the BCO side too, when people were signing contracts direct with carriers, which historically is a smart decision, and depending on your business, it's just those rates weren't holding. And so now you're going to business partners and asking for capacity when they're supporting their business already that they have and taking care of their clients and their book with a really confined marketplace. And so, working with partners who have, again, not just from an importer perspective, but from a freight forwarder perspective, have taken a step back, reassessed what their profile looks like, made some pivots on their own playbook and said, hey, we don't want to have too much dependency on one single partner. We need to make sure that we are diversifying our portfolio as well here too. It's incredibly important, especially in times of capacity constraints like we're seeing now that aren't going to go away. It gives you options. It's the whole goal of working with an NVO is that you are not just backed into one service line. And so I would encourage anyone on this call too, who is in the process of putting out an RFP, to really think about that as you go through it. Everyone was in a difficult situation when you had a lack of options last year. So make sure that you have options within your partners, that their portfolio is diversified, that they have both, the Seattle wedding day is planned for every single action, and that they do have carriers that can support outside of even potentially what your predicted allocation needs would be for the year. So critically important in my mind.
Great. Well, we're at the top of the hour. A couple of closing notes here, and thank you all for attending and asking excellent questions. We have not gone through all the questions, but I hope we covered quite a few here. There will be an on-demand version immediately after the webinar available. So if you want to review it, that is available. You can also download the slide deck. I know that Beth went quickly over those slides that are very insightful to show within the company, but they are available and you can download them. And please sign up for the next webinars, the State of Trade and our Customs. Thank you, Eric, for joining us. This was extremely insightful to get your front window view into all the issues. Beth, as always, thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for joining today. Have a nice day and hope to see you all soon.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.